Hi folks, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We'll just give it a few seconds to allow people to come on in. We've still got people coming in. Thanks for joining us wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you may be on. Hi folks, those who are just joining us. Okay, well, I think we'll make a start. We've got some people still coming in, but in the interest of timekeeping, we'll get things underway. Well, good evening, folks, and a very warm welcome to the new series of our online roadshow. It's a welcome back, of course, for many of you who have joined us earlier this year through January to March, when we moved our traditional roadshow online for the very first time. And we so enjoyed your companionship during the dark days of last winter. And we thought long and hard about whether to do the roadshow in person this autumn and winter, going to different venues across the UK, or whether to stick with the online format from earlier this year, where we can offer far greater content and speakers to all of you. And we put this question to you all, and the overwhelming feedback was that you really enjoyed us coming to your living rooms and not having to leave the warmth and comfort of your own homes. And in addition to not having to venture out down dark winter lanes at night, this platform, of course, also allows us to have more communication. We can share information and answer questions that are potentially interesting for everyone more easily. So please do fire away as we get started. We do want these sessions to be interactive. Importantly, as well, this time round, travel restrictions are relaxing on a regular basis, and it's great to be able to talk about our holidays now with more confidence about their departures, and generally just a lot more positivity with knowing that we can now imminently travel overseas to a number of destinations without much hassle. And it's not just European destinations. Kenya's moved off the red list, and we've seen a flurry of bookings for our safaris there next month, where the parks will be quiet, and there's probably never been a better time to travel there. So we've got a great series of mouth-watering presentations lined up for you this winter, taking us all the way through to March, believe it or not. Dates for our post-Christmas lineup will be released shortly, so there's a lot to look forward to. Now, just a reminder, you can pop your questions in the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to be opening up for questions very shortly. Now, if you're new to a Naturetrek webinar, don't worry, we can't see or hear you. It's not like a Zoom meeting that you might have attended with your local birding club where you can see everyone. It's only the speakers who can be heard and seen, so get yourselves comfortable on the sofa. And if any of you don't know me, my name's Sarah Frost. I'm Naturetrek's marketing manager, and also joining me this evening for our travel chat is Naturetrek's general manager, Andy Tucker, and operations manager, Kerry Porteous.
Hi.
And it's also with tremendous pleasure that we welcome Lou Jost, who is joining us live from Ecuador. Now, Lou is a botanist and co-founder of Fundación Ecominga, who are a partner of the World Land Trust and dedicated years to studying and protecting flora and fauna in the Andean forests of Ecuador. And he works really closely with us at Naturetrek to assist the ongoing management of our Naturetrek Reserve, which we're going to hear more about in due course. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andy, who's going to open up our travel chat for this evening. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Thanks everybody for joining us this evening. I can see some familiar names on the list of attendees there, those of you that joined us last winter online, and those of you that have joined us on tours over the years. In fact, there's some that joined myself and Lou in Ecuador in 2013, a tour that we co-led together to Mindo and Sacha Lodge. So welcome if you're joining us for the first time, or if you're old Naturetrek clients. It's great to have you with us. Well, I certainly feel calmer now than I did on, when was it, Sarah, the 3rd or 4th of January, when we kicked off our first Zoom evening. That was a real step into the unknown. We didn't quite know what to expect, but we've lived half of our lives since on Zoom, so it feels much more comfortable now. So to kick off, as Sarah said, this winter series of talks, we thought we'd have a bit of an open forum for the first 20 minutes this evening and encourage you to fire any questions at us regarding the travel industry, regarding our position at Naturetrek, how we view travel as we start to emerge from lockdown. Maybe you've got questions on paperwork and testing. Maybe you've heard, like us, that apparently there are going to be some quite interesting and exciting announcements from government later this week regarding the removal of countries from the red list. So any questions on any of those topics, please fire them across to us. Just from Naturet's perspective, as recently as probably 6 weeks, 2 months ago, I was feeling fairly pessimistic still, I think, thinking to myself, we're not going to get really anything off the ground to Europe this year, and the prospects for long haul travel in 2022 looks quite negative as well. But it's quite a dynamic time at the moment. Things are changing quickly. And if I put anything into writing or say anything to the Naturetrek staff at a meeting, it is quickly getting outdated because things are changing so quickly. But that's an exciting place to be, I think, at the moment. Having spent the majority of the last 17, 18 months cancelling holidays and transferring people and refunding, I can't tell you how positive it is to be in the travel industry at the moment and actually getting trips off the ground, receiving feedback from clients that have come back safely from abroad saying this is just what I needed after being cooped up for the last 2 years. So yeah, we're really positive at the moment, and let's hope there's more good news for us coming up on Thursday when we understand Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, will be addressing the nation again. So please fire in some questions to keep us chatting for the next 20 minutes. We've had a lot of groups out in September, primarily to Europe. As Sarah said, Kenya's just opened up, so we've got a lot of interest on tours to Kenya in November. So yeah, we're feeling really positive at the moment. Do we have any questions yet, Sarah?
I'll just have a look. Yeah, we've had one question come in already. Someone's asking, do Naturetrek help with tests and paperwork for traveling overseas?
Yeah, very much so. The regulations for each country differ, but we will lead you every step of the way there and give you precise instructions on what forms you need to fill out, what the testing requirements are, and any other loops that you need to jump through. I have to say it's been a bit of a learning curve, this for all of us, since early September, grappling with new rules and regulations. And in some cases, been quite frustrating. Take the Spanish health form, for example. Those of us in the office, unless we enter in fictitious information, we can't get past stage 1. So someone comes through and says, I've got a question on page 2 or stage 2. We can't actually see that page on our computer screen. So it's been a case of liaising with our tour leaders and trying to put together a team effort to answer questions on the various passenger health forms. But yes, to answer the question, basically, we will lead you every step of the way and tell you exactly what's required for travel to any particular country.
Thanks, Andy. We've had another question come in from Mary Rosk. She's asking, are there still problems with reduced availability of flights to the available destinations? I suppose this varies widely.
Yeah, to go back to my point a few seconds ago there, that things are changing so quickly. Airlines like us are weighing up the reopening of travel against staffing and the frequency of flights. So, for example, I can tell you that to Gran Canaria, our tour at Christmas is normally one of the most frequented routes out of the southeast and indeed all over the UK. You normally find a whole suite of charter flights and scheduled flights to a popular winter sun destination like Gran Canaria. But we've had to pay close to £500 per person for those flights to be able to lay on the holiday that we've promised. So that's a clear example of there being demand, but not the supply. The supply hasn't yet caught up with demand. But I'm expecting that to change quite frequently. You don't expect the EasyJets and Ryanairs of this world to turn down the opportunity to get their business off the ground and to make some money. So I do expect more flights to come online shortly.
I would just add to that, Andy. Some of you might have read in the Times at the weekend, there was an article on the airlines winners and losers during the pandemic and the number of routes that have reduced. So I think EasyJet had over 2,000 routes in 2019 and it's down to like 970 something now. So it's less than half the number of routes that they're currently flying. But the feeling my husband works at Gatwick Airport, so I hear a bit from there, and the feeling from there is they're going to come back in their droves really as quickly as they can, and and ramp up their route. So as soon as a destination is open for business and people want to go, they're ready to. Those routes ready to return. They've still got all their slots at the airport. They've all been able to keep them just open for when they're ready. So they're ready to fly, basically.
I'd add to that to say that that's the beauty of booking on a package trip. If you book on a holiday with us and there's no flight availability, that's our problem, not yours. So as in the case with Gran Canaria, it's up to us to stomach or take on board the extra cost. So yeah, that's the beauty of booking on a package trip. That worry about organising your own flights and diminishing availability, that's for us to stress about, not for you.
Thanks both. We've got quite a broad question here from Craig Chipperfield, asking if hotels in other countries that we operate with are suffering from a lack of staff like UK hospitality.
It's an interesting question, that. Our view in Naturetrek is that British hotels generally struggle to match the level of customer service that we see on the continent. Don't know why that is, something cultural, something stuffy about the UK hospitality industry. Not saying all hotels are like that, but it's a general trend that we observe sometimes. And I think when we started to get UK tours off the ground back in late May, June, July, through the summer, lots of you wrote into us and said, "Had a fantastic trip, great tour leaders, but the hotel are understaffed." And this is a problem we've seen in the UK this year. But I have to say that problem hasn't been echoed in feedback coming from overseas tours. We've just had, as I say, a lot of tours just returning from the Balearics, from Portugal, from Spain, from Latvia, from Romania, and the feedback is absolutely top quality, absolutely excellent, as we'd always expect. So I'm seeing evidence of UK's hospitality industry being understaffed and under pressure, but I'm not seeing that fed back from those returning from overseas tours with us.
Thanks, Andy. Kerry, you might be covering this in your imminent talk, so feel free to say so if you are. We have Kirsten Osser asking, what about sustainable tourism and flight-free tours?
Yeah, I am going to mention actually my talk, so I won't go on about it now. It is more of a mention during my talk, but I will signpost you to where to look for information during the talk on that. So yeah, we'll pause on that one. If there's any more questions after my talk, then feel free to pop another one in the box and I'll come back to you afterwards.
Thanks, Kerry. Another question going back to flights. Have the flight prices risen across the board now?
Well, it's a dynamic, fast-moving situation, that. So for my Gran Canaria, it's always been a problem. We have got flights, but a high cost. To some other destinations, flights are pre-pandemic. I think us Naturetrek staff, we're all planning our own private trips as well, with family, to see family members overseas or to go on a family holiday. So we're as interested in this from our own personal perspective as all of you are watching. As Kerry says, I think this is going to be a short-term problem, and I can see flight prices returning to something like pre-pandemic levels before too long.
Thanks, Andy. We have a question here from Caroline Webb. Hi, Caroline. She's mentioning an obvious concern. She says that we're worried that with the updating red list the red list being updated every 3 weeks, there's a risk that a destination that you're traveling to could move onto the red list just before people are due to go. And I, for one, could not afford to have to go into quarantine, either cost-wise or time-wise off work. What are our views on that risk happening?
Well,
we're hoping the red list will go.
Well, it's looking that way, isn't it? Yeah.
I think the first thing I'd say in response to that question is if a country moves to the red list shortly before you depart, then we will cancel the holiday and give you a full refund. We're absolutely clear on that. We won't run a holiday if it's red, because that will mean, as per current news, that you need to quarantine either on arrival in destination or arrival back into the UK. And we took a decision very early on in the pandemic that if quarantine is necessary either on arrival in destination or arrive home, that's untenable for the majority of our clients, and therefore we would close the tour down and give a full refund, and that stands. It's more complicated, I think, if you're on holiday with us and the country turns red, and there's a narrow window before you have to come home and go into an expensive quarantine hotel at Heathrow, I think the chances of that happening is decreasing. I think the government have learned from past mistakes that, Portugal, wasn't it, in the midsummer turned red, very late notice, and there was a massive scramble to get flights home. So I personally think the risk of that happening into next year without sufficient warning for people to make plans is fairly low. I think the risk posed by variants has decreased, and I don't see us returning to the difficult toing and froing that we saw early on this year. So hopefully that reassures you to some extent. But yeah, primarily if a country's red, then we won't operate the tour. You have a full refund or transfer to a future tour.
Thanks, Andy. And another question here from Bill Grierson, who says, we know the UK rules on travel, but what about the rules in the main countries we'll likely be visiting from the UK, particularly Africa, North America, South America? And what about the main cruise destinations? I think by this he means it's all very well if we're able to go to these travel, all very well if we're able to go to these countries, the UK government allows travel there, but what if they have different rules and might not want to let us in?
We're looking at running tours to countries that have very similar COVID-related rules to us. So if that means self-isolation or quarantine, it means that you can't run a group wildlife holiday. So yeah, we'll be sticking to the safe destinations where we know rules are comparable or very similar to those we have in the UK. And any country that imposes self-isolation or quarantine or other stricter measures which impact on the enjoyment of a typical group wildlife holiday, it simply means we won't be able to operate there. But there are enough destinations now which are opening up and welcoming tourists for us to be pretty happy at the moment compared to what we have had to put up with over the past 18 months or so.
Thanks, Andy. And a question from Helen Swift. Is there a requirement for travellers with Naturetrek to be vaccinated against COVID when going on group tours, or does this just depend on the country being travelled to?
It's a good question, that one, and one that we grappled long with earlier on this year before travel opened up. And at some stages we thought, well, we're going to impose vaccinate, you're going to have to be vaccinated before you travel with Naturetrek. But then we thought, well, that's going to eliminate some people who can't be vaccinated for medical reasons. So we haven't made it imperative that you're vaccinated to join a group tour, but we have asked people to do pre-departure COVID tests, because what we've wanted to do is to begin a tour in a COVID-free fashion and then keep a COVID-free bubble through the tour. And we've had dozens of groups out by now. And I'm happy to report that that's been the case. We haven't had a single case of COVID on tour yet, just because 99.9% of our tour participants are vaccinated. The tiny proportion that aren't, we presume, is for medical reasons. And people have been very sensible. They've self-isolated before a tour. They've been very happy to adopt mask wearing in minibuses and social distancing in restaurants, etc. And we haven't had any problems. So I think we've been on the right track there.
And quite a good question here from Roger Bennett. What input or influence does the travel industry have on government decisions on the red list or the go list? Are Naturetrek involved in any such input?
Yeah, great question. I wish we had more influence. Our two trade bodies, ABTA and ATO, ABTA is the Association of British Travel Agents, and ATO, the Association of Independent Tour Operators, have been very vocal on our behalf, and all of the member organisations, other tour operators like Naturetrek. But it's been a real struggle. It's been a huge area of frustration. The Transport Secretary normally tweets that he's about to speak 10 minutes before he speaks. It's often late on a Thursday or Friday, when us tour operators were all about to close for the weekend and they've got little chance to act. There's no pre-warning, apart from some leaks to the press on what might be said. We've long campaigned for the Foreign Office travel advice to be aligned to the red, amber and green list. That's a continual source of frustration. The fact that some countries on the amber and green list, so you'd have thought we're open to travel, the FCO, the Foreign Office, advised against travel. So you've got two governmental departments giving out contradictory advice. And as I said earlier, we need both to be aligned before we can operate tours to some of these exciting destinations. So to answer your question, I'm afraid I have to be honest and say we've had very little impact. That's not just Naturetrek, that's our trade bodies who represent hundreds of tour operators, the Transport Secretary, Department of Transport and the government. I have to say, in my opinion, have not listened to the travel industry and have not taken our views on board. But having said that, I don't want to get too negative and to dwell on that. I'm more focused now on the world finally opening up and us able to do some business and lay on some great wildlife holidays again.
Thanks, Andy. And on a similar vein of what influence Naturetrek has for getting tourism up and running again, Wilf and Julia Powell are asking, what are the vaccination rates like in the countries we're planning to visit? And do we have any influence over this for the people that we deal with?
We're insisting on all of our local staff and guides are vaccinated. A lot of the long haul destinations are still on the red list. That may change on Thursday. As I say, we want to keep a COVID-free bubble on our tours. That means all local staff have got to be vaccinated and do pre-departure tests. But as probably you're all seeing as much as we are in the news, there are plenty of countries around the world now with very high levels of vaccination. And countries that actually remain on the red list, which if you look at the pure statistics, shouldn't arguably be there. And that's where real pressure has been exerted upon the government by our trade bodies to get those destinations removed from the red list. If vaccination levels are high and COVID rates are lower than we have here in the UK, we can't understand why travel isn't already open.
Thanks, Andy. Going back to hotels and staffing, Rachel Sibler's asking, or saying she's got experience of 2 British hotels this summer not servicing rooms. This is because of COVID safeguarding, and she's interested to know if this happens in other countries. Again, quite a broad question. This would depend on the hotels.
I haven't heard of this happening on any of our overseas tours, so it's quite a simple answer to that one. Yeah, I do hear the point there that perhaps service levels were lower due to COVID measures being put in place. In other words, your room might be serviced every 4 days instead of every day, rather than just a pure lack of staff. But we're not seeing this overseas at all. Spain, Portugal, all the other countries we're operating to, we haven't had any of that feedback at all.
I experienced this on our mole trip, which I was leading in June. And after sort of 3 days of the rooms being serviced, I simply went round to the group and asked everyone who would like their room servicing. And every member of the group did want their room servicing and felt comfortable with someone coming into their room. And I had a word with manager and it was sorted straight away and serviced every day for the rest of the trip. So I'd say it's something that would hopefully be able to be resolved fairly quickly as well. Right, we'll just have a look for some more questions. We do have one from Daphne Loosley, who is saying she's booked for Japan in January, and I promised Paul I'd stick with it until you made a decision one way or the other. Thank you, Daphne. Obviously the issue in Japan's situation is I think she means worse than ours. Do we have any news or updates? Well, Paul will be keeping a very close eye on that, and I'm assuming not making a call until closer to the time. And did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we've been very wary about pulling the plug on tours prematurely. And we've actually already cancelled some tours in November. And if those destinations are opened up by the Foreign Office and taken off the red list on Thursday, we'll be kicking ourselves because we'll think to ourselves, why don't we just keep it open for a little while longer? But it's a balancing act, this, isn't it? Because those of you that have been booked, you want to know where you stand. You've got work commitments, family commitments. You want time to book your cat into the category, to order your test, to do your paperwork. You want to know where you stand. If you're going on a trip to Argentina or Japan or Australia or an Antarctic cruise, you don't want to be told 2 weeks before departure that it's either on or off. We've got to be sensible and realise people want decisions making, 6 weeks or 2 months ahead of time. So that's generally been the ballpark timescale we've been working to, 6 weeks to 2 months. And I think we'll probably stick to that. Let's see what the government says on Thursday. But for that tour to Japan in January, I'd be probably expecting Paul, who's the ops manager for Japan, to be making a decision sometime in mid-November. Yeah, Sheila Thomas, I'll cry if Antarctica in November suddenly becomes possible. Well, the Naturetrek office will be flooded with tears.
So will we, yeah, Sheila, you definitely won't be the only one. Yeah, that cruise is 3 years in the making. And yeah.
Just on that point, our partner Oceanwide Expeditions, from whom we chartered that boat, we were talking to them today, and there's a chance that one of the boats will set sail for Antarctica to witness the solar eclipse. So if miraculously Antarctica and Argentina do open up on Thursday, we will be in touch with you, Sheila, and all of the 90 of you that are booked on that boat to discuss late options. So all is not lost. Let's see what happens on Thursday.
Great, thanks, Andy. Well, we can pause questions there for a moment, and I think we could now hand over to Kerry, if you'd like to take over chatting about our sustainable tourism initiatives.
I would be delighted to. Right, bear with me one moment, folks. I'm just going to fire up my presentation. Okie doke. So it's really lovely to be back, and I say that not just to be back on doing the webinars again, but I'm actually on maternity leave at the moment. I had a baby in early March, and I've been hunkered down in Surrey ever since, really. So I've had quite a crazy evening trying to ensure my children are safely asleep, and also getting my brain back in gear. In normal times, I would be the operations manager for a whole variety of tours from Sweden to Switzerland to Madagascar, which keeps me very nicely busy. But I also look after our sustainability projects at Naturetrek, and I lead our sustainability committee. We do all sorts of exciting things alongside our day-to-day jobs. So we thought this evening, as we're kicking off the webinar series for the winter, it'd be a nice time for me to just tell you a bit more about this, really, and what we all get up to. I think we're all very privileged in the Naturetrek office, our tour leaders and you, our clients, to have had the opportunities to see some really amazing wildlife across the globe. Perhaps not in the last 18 months, but in times before and in times to come. And then the 35 years that Naturetrek's been in existence, I think we've, being an ethical and environmentally conscious tour operator, has really been at the heart of everything we've done. We've always had a policy of, for example, visiting parts of the world that don't benefit from mass tourism, travelling in small groups, choosing very small local family-run accommodation, buying local produce for picnics, supporting local conservation efforts. They're all things that have just been an inherent part of how we organise our holidays, and always have been. But I'd say we noticed a bit of a change amongst our client base and across the wider travel industry, really, probably back in sort of mid-2019, with people starting to question the environmental footprint of their travels, perhaps for the first time. Whether that's the impact they have on their destination and how many flights they're taking, the carbon impact of their flights. Really good questions to be asking, really, and thinking about who they're travelling with, what they're going to do, what they're going to see, and about making their travel worthwhile, really. I would say all of us in the office are very firmly of the opinion that travelling to the world's amazing national parks and wildlife-rich areas is absolutely imperative for their protection. Many of our local guides are passionate conservation biologists. You're going to meet Lou a little bit later, who's a fantastic example of that. Revenue from park and reserve fees, as well as local employment in the tourist industry, or the tourist dollars that you spend, it all aids the protection of rare species. And certainly we as a business have seen the impact of what happens if all of a sudden tourists completely pull out of a destination and tourists stop going. We know some of our local guides, some guys that I've worked with in Madagascar who would have been at the heart of protecting their local forest and the amazing species within them, who are now back with their families planting rice for a living. Then they're not showcasing their amazing wildlife and really saving it from near extinction. And we want them back. We want them back in the forest, protecting their wildlife, showing off their wildlife, showing it to tourists. So whilst I will not be at all sad if no one ever takes another business class flight to New York for a meeting or goes on a stag weekend to Prague, what I do really want is responsible, sensible, considered tourism to some of these amazing places to return, and for tourists to go back and visit their wildlife there in a really considered and respectful manner. So the purpose of the next sort of 10 minutes or so is for me to tell you about a few of the projects that we at Naturetrek are involved in, both here in Hampshire and around the world. Andy's mentioned ATO so far this evening, the Association of Independent Tour Operators, and we've always been actively involved in their sustainability measures. Back in the day, we received their 5-star sustainable tourism rating. That was subsequently replaced with something called Project Protect, which encourages all members to take on a big project each year to do something that protects the destinations they visit or the communities that they work with. And we've been doing that for the last few years. But I'm going to kick off by telling you a little bit about the 2 main schemes that we support financially. And as a tour operator that operates all over the world, it is quite tricky to decide what to do and who best could make use of the money that we want to use to protect the areas that we visit. We've, for some time now, for many years really, have supported 2 main schemes. The first is working with butterfly conservation. So we donate 10% of the proceeds of our butterfly tours to butterfly conservation. So those are around 25 to 30 butterfly specific tours. So if you've joined Butterflies of the Swiss Alps or Butterflies of the French Pyrenees, Butterflies of La Brenne, something like that, then 10% of the proceeds of your tour has gone to butterfly conservation. And to date, we have raised £225,000 for the charity. And that goes to some very specific projects. So, for example, protecting the Duke of Burgundy butterfly in the Chilterns, and some more broader projects. For example, there was a nice project that some of our money helped fund nearby Winchester a year or 2 ago, where 500 or so school children all went to their local butterfly conservation reserve, discovered the wildlife there, opened some moth traps, went exploring under logs, lots of nice things, basically inspired them about their local wildlife. The second project that we do is working with Fundación Encominga and the World Land Trust. And I'm not going to go into massive specific detail on what Fundación Encominga are up to, because I'm very pleased that we've got Lou Jost from Encominga joining us after the break. But I will tell you about what we do from a Naturetrek side of things, and how we raise our money, and a bit about the reserve that we're creating. So we first encouraged our clients to offset their emissions from their flights back in the year 2000. And from 2007, we started making donations on behalf of our clients. So when they booked a holiday, we would make a donation on their behalf to help offset some of the carbon impact of that flight. What we do now is donate £15 for a long haul flight, £5 for a short haul flight when you book. And we use that to purchase tracts of land in central Ecuador in the Andes. This purchase critically endangered cloud forest. And to date, we've raised £430,000. Some of that which is already been spent on cloud forest, some of which is waiting to be spent on future acquisitions. And to date, our reserve is 1,389 acres and growing. This is where it is. It is, as I said, in central, flip too quickly, central Ecuador. And I will skip on actually. And I'll get my little pointer out. It's situated between 2 national parks. So this is the Sangay National Park. This is the Yangonates National Park. And this is the little Naturetrek Reserve, say little, good sized Naturetrek Reserve. What we are trying to do is complete this wildlife corridor between these two national parks. It's an area of forest that would otherwise be felled for cultivation if it wasn't protected, but it was classed by WWF as one of the 200 most important wildlife corridors in the world. There's some incredible wildlife here. So new species are being discovered. If you've been a client of Naturetrek for some time, you must by now have heard of the Naturetrek frog, Noblella Naturetrekii, which is the top photo there. That was a brand new species of frog discovered in our reserve and named after Naturetrek. The bottom one is another new species to science, the Pristimantis genus frog, which will be named after one of our founders, Marianne. This Blackia, for example, is not known in any national park and yet is present in the Naturetrek Reserve. And there's some amazing Andean species like these: mountain tapir, spectacled bear, cock of the rock, giant antpitter. There is some fantastic stuff in this reserve. So as I said, the total size of the Naturetrek Reserve is now 1,389 acres. Last year, we sent another £25,000 over to Lou as down payment on our next 200 acres, which is this very area of forest that you can see in the photo. So if you travelled on a Naturetrek trip in 2019 or booked one and still have it booked for 2021, 2022, if you're one of the very kind people who didn't get to go on holiday last year but decided that you'd leave your donation with us anyway, then this bit of forest is what you've helped us to purchase. So a huge thank you. As I said, it is an incredibly important area, and for us this is a really worthwhile project, more so than any sort of generic tree planting or carbon offset scheme. We think it's really valuable because it is locking up carbon that would otherwise be released to the atmosphere if these trees were felled, but it also prevents the national parks from becoming isolated cloud forest islands. So it's protecting very diverse habitats and the endangered wildlife that you find therein. This was actually the focus of our Project Protect project for ATO in 2019. We went on a bit of an awareness raising mission, and we started asking our clients if you'd like to match our donation to the project, to the reserve. So there's no pressure to do that. We will make the donation regardless, but a really good number of you decided that you'd like to match our donation as well. So thank you if you did that. Just helps us protect even more of this fantastic area. So in early 2020, we were busily pondering what we might do as our next big project for the year. We have all sorts of things going on at any time, really. Some very small things like or deciding where to source our pencils from more ethically, or reducing the amount of plastic bottle waste at all, getting rid of plastic straws. There's lots of things to go at, but we like to have a good chunky project to get involved in as well. We definitely noticed after we published our 2019 brochure that more people were asking about holidays that don't involve flying. Now that could be for different reasons. I think some people have got to the point where they thought they might do one serious long haul trip a year, but then do something close to home that doesn't involve a flight as their other holiday. Some people just don't like flying. But there was definitely a growing demand for flight-free holidays. And that's actually something that we've always had a good portfolio of. So we already offer holidays to France and to Spain by ferry. We go to Belgium and the Netherlands, and France again by Eurostar. And we have a huge number of holidays in the UK. But we thought this would be a really good thing to crack on with in 2020, as well as researching overland routes to some of the destinations that we already reached by plane. However, you know what happened next? Good old COVID struck, and suddenly expanding our portfolio anywhere abroad didn't seem like the best use of our time right then. What we did do was create a landing page on our website. So if you are interested in any of our holidays that don't involve a flight, then there is a whole no flights section. If you go under tour focus, you can have a look at all the no flights tours that are there. And actually, as it happened, we did massively expand this over the course of the pandemic, because the only place we could really go to was the UK. So we've been doing lots of trips there, none of which involved a flight. And it's something that we will absolutely continue with, yeah, for the foreseeable, forever, really. We're keen to keep offering tours that you can access by train, or options for getting to other places by train. But it didn't seem quite the right big project to take on in 2020. Instead, we thought we would focus on a project a little closer to home. We're very lucky at Naturetrek in that our office is set in amongst 12 acres of grassland, and this was formerly used for livestock grazing. So over the years, lots of agricultural activities drastically reduced the site's ecological value. So in 2020, we pledged to enhance our grounds for wildlife. And actually, it's developed into a really exciting project, and it's definitely kept our office staff buzzing with wildlife sightings all summer long. Initially, our main focus was creating a new wildlife pond. So the pictures you can see at the top were what used to be there. It was basically a green, dead swamp. So we got stuck in there in our lunch times, spent the rest of the afternoon smelling a little bit unusual. Drained the pond, removed the old broken liner, and then got a digger in and yeah, really expanded the size of it. We had a race in the winter between lockdowns to get it lined, thinking we must get it lined in the winter so it fills up. As it turns out, it was plenty wet enough the entire year that it would have filled up without any drama anyway. But it was good to have it done in time for the spring regardless. And we've done this alongside various other projects as well around our site. So we've been planting lots of native hedging, including a high percentage of blackthorn. We have been actively managing the grass stands to increase the plant diversity there, grass diversity. We've been installing new nesting boxes, a new barn owl box, and we've seen barn owl hunting over our fields. We've been very lucky to have had little owls breeding within sight of our desks over the last couple of years. That's not always brilliant for staff productivity, but it is absolutely marvellous to watch. Whilst we had our digger in, we did this scrape that you can see at the bottom left to keep an eye on what's arriving and what's colonising the chalk beneath the original or the existing grass. And it's been fantastic. So over the course of the summer, bat surveys have recorded numerous species. Smooth newt larvae have been spotted. Hundreds of frogs have emerged. I did put a video in, but I actually don't realise I can't remember how I meant to hit play. That's maternity leave brain for you. So I'm just going to point out there are in fact a couple of dragonflies in this still video. I think we've had broad-bodied chasers and emperor dragonfly, lots of damselflies. And probably the highlight for many staff and our open day guests who can join us during the summer are the brown hair streaks. So we, one of our members of the team spotted them flying, I think a year or two ago now, in neighbouring land and subsequently egg laying. So they've been back this year, we've been spotted flying and then mating and egg laying again this year. And it's for this reason that we've been planting lots of blackthorn, as this is where brown hair streaks lay their eggs on young blackthorn shoots. So they have definitely been the highlight for many. And if you are in Hampshire anytime, especially next spring and summer, then do come and join us. Come and have a look and see if you can find them with us as well. Oh, you know what? Look, I've just got the video going. There we are. Here are little dragonflies having a wonderful time on the new pond. And here it is in all its glory. And in fact, we have been so inspired by everything we've been up to on our own side that we've launched a new rewilding service. So our lovely colleague Sophie's heading this up, offering you the chance to book one of our expert leaders or staff members who are all over the country to come to your private garden, identify the wildlife that you've got there, and perhaps other wildlife in your local area, consider how you might be able to enhance your garden for wildlife. And our hope is that together we can all create really a network of private reserves, providing habitat connectivity, food, shelter, breeding grounds together all over the country. So I'm going to finish there. I hope that gives you a little bit of insight as to what we get up to, some of our projects that we've got ongoing. If you've got ideas for something that you think we should be tackling in terms of sustainable tourism, whether that's at home, in the UK, further afield, something that occurs to you on one of our tours, then we will always, always, always be happy to hear from you. So please get in touch. But I'm going to stop there and hand back to Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. I particularly enjoyed the video of the dragonfly there.
It's well worth waiting for it.
It really was, yeah. I could even hear the humming of it. I'm not sure if that was the humming of its wings, perhaps not, but it sounded like it was. Right, folks, we're going to go to a quick break now. We'll just have 10 minutes where you can nip to the loo, grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee or a glass of wine, and we'll be back at 8:25 p.m. or in 10 minutes time, whatever your local time is, where we're going to hear from Lou Jost all about his work over in Ecuador. So back in 10 minutes time. Okay, see you shortly. Right, folks, welcome back. We're going to dive straight into our next presentation now. So Lou is going to continue talking to us about Ecuador. Do feel free to continue firing questions over to us. You can pop these in the chat section or the Q&A section, and we'll save these up for the end once Lou has finished his talk. So Lou, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me to give this talk. As you've heard, I live in Ecuador, lived here for about 25 years, and it's a fantastic place to live. This is the view from my front window. And for a biologist, slight problem. Slideshow is not advancing. Hang on. Okay. For a biologist, this has to be one of the most interesting places in the world to live, especially if you're interested in plants, as I am. This is a map of the biodiversity hotspots with respect to plants in the world. And you can see that Ecuador here has the highest plant diversity of nearly anywhere in the world. There are a few other small spots with similar diversity, but in total, the New World Tropics has twice as many plant species as the Old World Asian tropics and African tropics combined. So this is the place to be if you're a plant scientist. A very exciting place. And the biggest family in Ecuador are the orchids. Here is an old table of number of species per family. I don't know if you'll be able to read this on your screen, but the orchids at the time that this was written had almost 3,000 species almost 3,000 species in Ecuador. And the next largest family, the daisy family, only had 800. And as I said, this is an older book. We've been discovering lots of new orchids since this was written just 20 years ago. The current number is now 4,200 species of orchids in Ecuador. I don't think any place in the world can match that rate of species discovery. There's so much to learn here. It's a very exciting place. And of those, that number of orchids, a very large fraction of them are endemic to Ecuador, which means they're not found anywhere else in the world. This makes orchids important for conservation as well, and they can act as a guide to help us locate areas of high conservation priority. And you can see in terms of endemic plants, endemic species of Ecuador, almost 1/3 of the species of plants that are endemic to Ecuador are orchids, an astonishing number. And that's kind of curious. As a scientist, you wouldn't really expect that orchids would have such a high endemism. Usually we think of the evolution of endemic species as caused by dispersal limitation, like the Galapagos finches. Everyone can easily understand why there are so many Galapagos finches. There are different Darwin finches on each island because they're reproductively isolated from each other. They don't cross regularly from one island to the other. But orchids, of all the plants in the world, orchids are the least limited by dispersal abilities. They have tiny dust-like seeds that blow in the wind. And in fact, the orchids on the Galapagos Island are mostly the same species as those found on the mainland, on the adjacent mainland, the coastal part of Ecuador. So there's gene flow across 800 kilometers of open ocean. So we presume that that's happening in the rest of Ecuador as well. So why on earth are there so many endemic species unique to single sites or small or single mountains if they can travel so freely? One would have expected that orchids would be the least endemic of plants. So that was one of the things that interested me to try to study and figure out. So I moved to Baños on the edge of the Amazon basin, right where the Amazon meets the Andes, a very highly diverse place. I'm going to zoom in on it here. This is the Rio Pastaza Valley, the deepest, straightest valley in the eastern Andes of Ecuador. There we are. This is a big volcano called Tungurahua. Baños is here. This is a high, dry desert. And this part of Ecuador is lowland Amazonian forest. So in a very short space, you go from some of the wettest forest in the world and hottest forest in the world to a cold, dry desert, astonishing range of habitats. And you can see that there are different mountains projecting, different mountain chains projecting into the valley here, like little fingers, parallel fingers. This is the town of Baños, and I live above this town on this hill here. This is the volcano Tungurahua, which was active until very recently. I took this from my house. I took this from my kitchen window. So it was a very exciting place to live, very dynamic place geologically. And I was interested in, I focused on the orchids of the genus Lepanthes. This is the genus of orchids that has the most endemic species in Ecuador. Many of the species are known from only a single site. So if I looked at the distributions of this genus of high endemism, then I might be able to learn why orchids are so endemic, so locally endemic. So that is what I set out to do. And I walked the mountains for 20 years here, trying to understand that. I got to know these Lepanthes very well. Lepanthes are a funny kind of orchid. Normally, you can look at a flower and sort of guess what pollinates it. But if you look at this, you really have no idea what could pollinate it. It turns out that these are pollinated by male fungus gnats who think that this is a female fungus gnat. And the actual morphology of the orchid, of the flower, makes sense when you realize that. This is a landing platform for the male, and it lands here. This is a headlock, and the fungus gnat mates with the flower here and gets pollen deposited on its belly as it does so. And every species of Lepanthes imitates a slightly different fungus gnat, so that every Lepanthes has its own specific pollinator. The flowers are tiny, and very often they're under the leaves of the orchid. So you don't notice these plants if you're just walking through the forest. You have to recognize the leaf and know to turn it over to see the flower underneath. And it's a huge genus. There are more than 300 species in Ecuador, more than 1,000 species in Latin America, and 100 species just in my little valley here. Very widely, a wide variety of different shapes and colors. And so I mapped out their distributions on all these mountains, and I found that there were bands of similarity between one chain of mountains north of the Rio Pastaza and the corresponding chain just opposite it on the south side of the Rio Pastaza. So this chain would have similar species to this chain, but you wouldn't see similarity between mountains in the east-west direction. There were very few species shared between this mountain and this one, even though this is a shallower valley than the valley of the Rio Pastaza. Something was keeping the orchids from this mountain from growing on this mountain. And when you look carefully at the climate and the clouds and how things move, it starts to make sense. The winds come off the Amazon basin and they go up this deep, straight valley, and they drop most of their water on the first chain of mountains, and then slightly less on the next chain, and slightly less on the next chain, until finally you're up in this desert and there's no water at all. So every one of these chains of mountains, as you go from east to west, has a different climate, different amounts of water, different amounts of mist. However, it's the same climate as the corresponding mountain just south of the Rio Pastasa. So these orchids have evolved habitat specialization, and that's what's keeping them from colonizing adjacent mountains. It's not that they're limited by dispersal. The seeds are probably blowing up here, but the plants aren't able to thrive because the climate is a little different, just a little different. Not enough to even notice if you weren't a plant scientist. But thanks to these orchids, we could start to identify these microclimates and start to distinguish forests that previously seemed homogeneous. Here's the graph of the climate, the precipitation in Ecuador. Blue is the wettest and yellow is the driest. And here's that square that I've been showing you. And you can see that there's the sharpest climate gradient in the whole country is right here. And that's what's driving the endemism, the local endemism, and the high degree of specialization. So much so that there are more unique plant species in this corridor, in this tiny Rio Pastasa Valley, than there are in the Galapagos. And yet no one paid attention to this valley. But scientifically and for conservation, this valley, in terms of plants anyway, is at least as important as the Galapagos. Unfortunately, it's being deforested very quickly for agriculture. And so after discovering all this hidden endemism, my friends and I began to work to figure out how to conserve these hotspots of endemism that fall outside the national parks. And so we created this foundation, Ecominga Foundation, to try to protect these critical hotspots that we ourselves had discovered. And if we didn't do something about them, no one else would. So we put a lot of effort into trying to save these forests. And so we have created, over the last 15, 20 years, we've created a set of reserves protecting each of the major bands of habitats in this upper Rio Pastasa watershed. And we now have a total of about 4,000 or 5,000 hectares in this valley. And Naturetrek has been partners with us in this effort to save these endemic hotspots. And we have, Naturetrek has supported 2 blocks of forest, 2 reserves. The most important, this reserve here, which, as Carrie mentioned, connects 2 national parks. It's the critical link between our Cerro Candelaria Reserve and our Machay Reserve. It's the critical link that allows us to try to protect continuous forest in this very high demand area, heavy use area in the Rio Pastasa Valley. This is where all the people live. This is where the highest deforestation rate is in the area. So this is the hardest to protect. And that's what we're doing with Naturetrek. And I'd like to add something to what Carrie said about the special dimension that Naturetrek adds to this conservation effort. A lot of companies are concerned about carbon stock and carbon sequestration. And this is This is laudable. But you can add an extra dimension to that. You can add the biodiversity dimension to carbon sequestration. And that's what Naturetrek has been doing. They've not just been conserving some random forest. They've been focused on conserving land that has really high biodiversity value. And this differentiates them from a lot of the other companies that protect forest for conservation, for carbon sequestration. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour of some of these reserves. There's not enough time to show you all of them, but I'd like to show you some of the biodiversity and some of the endemic species in these reserves. And starting with the Naturetrek reserves and the two reserves on either side of the Naturetrek reserve, Cerro Candelaria and Machai reserves. These are high mountains. Cerro Candelaria and Machai are each around 3,400 to 3,800 meters in elevation. And the lowest part of the Naturetrek reserve between those two peaks is at about 1,500 meters of elevation. So a quite wide range of elevations and habitats. The highest parts are grassland, alpine grassland. This is the very, very top of the reserve. And we have endangered mammals like the mountain tapir. This is the most highly endangered Latin American tapir. It's we mainly see it in camera traps. We don't see it in person very often. We also have multiple spectacled bears. And again, we find these mostly by camera traps. And in fact, we can count them using these camera trap photos because every one has a distinctive face pattern. So we know that there are at least 6 spectacled bears using our Cerro Candelaria and Naturetrek reserves. There are also puma. This is my painting of an ocelot, with many ocelots there. There are also a few monkey species, the capuchin monkey and the howler monkey. This picture is taken from Wikipedia. We don't have good photos of it. But I'm pleased to say that just about 2 weeks ago, I heard for the first time in 25 years, the call of these howler monkeys coming from the Naturetrek Reserve. When I first moved to Ecuador, I heard them in that valley, and I hadn't heard them since. And a few weeks ago, I heard that amazing roaring sound, sort of demonic roaring, for the first time after all those years. So it means that our reserve guards are protecting those reserves, and their biodiversity value is increasing. This may be difficult to see on your screen, but these are 2 subtropical night monkeys, extremely rare, almost never photographed in the wild. Just recently, we've been able to photograph them. And these monkeys have to be careful because there are these giant eagles, the black and chestnut eagles, which can eat these monkeys. And our guards have seen them carrying capuchin monkeys through the air with their tails dangling. These are, I'm sure all of you know about harpy eagles, but there are other giant monkey-eating eagles in the tropical rainforests, and this is the 3rd largest eagle. This is the juvenile. This is perched in our Cerro Candelaria Reserve. Another juvenile, incredible, powerful bird. Another positive note about the biodiversity of the Naturetrek and Cerro Candelaria reserves is the recent arrival of large numbers of white-lipped peccaries. Now, most of you probably don't know white-lipped peccaries, but these are typically lowland Amazonian rainforest animals. They travel in herds of up to 200. They're dangerous. If you run into one of these herds, you have to climb a tree, otherwise they'll tear you apart. So very exciting animals, but they're really lowland animals. But here they are for the first time in all of our, even the local people had no recollection of ever seeing these animals in their forests. But here they were, fairly large herds of them. Here they are. They're photographed. These are photographed from the side of the Rio Pastaza. Amazing to see these. This is my picture from Peru, where lowland Amazonian untouched rainforest. There are pretty good numbers of them, but totally surprising to see them in the Naturetrek Reserve. Large number of hummingbirds in these reserves. Beautiful Andean cocks of the rock displaying. They have leks in our reserves. They're fancy birds like the quetzal. Actually, two species of quetzal, this golden-headed quetzal and this crested quetzal. Beautiful chlorophonias. As Carrie mentioned, there are extremely local, rare, unique plants like this Blakea attenboroughii, which I named after Sir David Attenborough and got to present it to him in London. There's new species of magnolias here. You would think magnolia is a spectacular tree, would have been discovered by now, but in our mosaic of Baños area reserves, we've discovered 2 new species of magnolia, one of which lives in the Naturetrek reserves. Here's 4 new species of African violet relatives discovered by my friend John Clark in the Cerro Candelaria Reserve. Some of these also live in the Naturetrek reserves. Endemic orchids, new endemic orchids. Too many to talk about. Let's skip over to the other unit of the Naturetrek reserves. This unit lies in a different mountain chain than the first unit, and so it has different species of both plants and animals. It has turned out that the orchids, the endemism of the orchids has given us clues or hints hints about where to look for endemic animals as well. And that the endemic animals correlate well with the endemic species of orchids. This is the picture that Carrie showed you. This is the forest that we've bought with Naturetrek's help. Cloud forest, very wet and cold, beautiful canopy. And Carrie mentioned the Noblella naturetrekii, which we discovered on that reserve and named after Naturetrek. And more recently, we discovered this species of Pristimantis, which Carrie also mentioned, which we are naming after Marianne at David's request. And it's a beautiful little thing, very intricate, very colorful. And we've submitted the article a few weeks ago. It was reviewed, we got it back, we made revisions, and we submitted it yesterday. So it should be published any moment now. I'm excited about that. New species of orchids there, like this new Lepanthes, another endemic Lepanthes, endemic species of an orchid genus called Tegia. I discovered this in 2001, and it turned out that this was one of 30 new endemic Tegia orchids that my students and I discovered on these peaks. An astonishing plant radiation, more interesting than anything on the Galapagos, and more specious than any of the plant radiations on the Galapagos. A remarkable thing that we still don't fully understand. Here's another species in that same genus, also new. Here's sort of a family picture of some of the new species of Tegia from these mountains. There's nothing like this practically nothing like this in Latin America. We've done DNA analysis, my colleagues at the University of Florida, Gainesville, and we've discovered that this radiation took place just in the last 2.5 million years, one of the fastest plant radiations known in the world. And again, with very little geographic isolation. It's not easy to understand how this happens. It's very interesting. It's not like the simple picture, the classical picture of speciation. The plants are wonderful here. Everything's covered with mosses and bryophytes and lichens and liverworts. It almost looks, when you start looking at the branches close up, it's almost like being underwater and looking through a coral reef. And the plants glow under ultraviolet light. This is a bunch of liverworts under black light, and they glow like those old-fashioned disco posters that were popular in the 70s. A hidden dimension to these cloud forests that most of us have never seen. But you can walk around with a UV flashlight in the forest, and all these colors light up in front of you. Beautiful birds here, like this gray-breasted mountain toucan that I painted. And unbelievably, this is even crazier than the white-lipped peccaries. A few months ago, some of the local people in Vizcaya claimed to see a black jaguar, a black panther, near the Vizcaya unit of the Naturetrek Reserve. Two different people saw it in two different occasions, and then some other people saw it in a neighboring town about 20 miles away. So these Naturetrek reserves may be patrolled by black jaguars, which would be incredible, although it's way out of their normal habitat. So lastly, in the few remaining minutes that I have, I'm going to take you on a quick tour of one of our other reserves. Now here's where the Naturetrek reserves were, on this mountain and on this mountain. I'm going to take you to the Rio Zuniak Reserves here. And Naturetrek has in the past thought about offering individually designed tours to this reserve. We have a scientific station deep in this reserve, and it's very simple and basic and straightforward. But individuals or small groups who wanted, here's the reserve, who wanted an individual unique experience could conceivably stay in this scientific station and explore this reserve. They would have it all to themselves. This is the station, very simple. Don't expect luxury, but you're in, and it takes 6 hours to walk to this station. So it's not for the faint of heart, but someone who wanted to live deep inside a pristine wild forest could conceivably talk to Naturetrek about arranging such a visit. This is a granite mountain with clear running water, very mossy, fantastic snakes like this poisonous snake, Bothrops pulcher. Wonderful monkeys like these woolly monkeys. This is a female carrying its baby on its back. These monkeys used to be very, very scared of people. You could never get close to them. You could hardly even see them. But after 10 years of protecting them, these monkeys let us watch them at leisure. Our guards took this picture by climbing the tree that the monkey was in. And the monkey didn't move, didn't care. One of the monkeys slept while our guard climbed up the tree and took his picture. This is totally different from a monkey behavior you'll see anywhere else in Ecuador in these kinds of forests. So very exciting, but they can't be too relaxed because they are hunted also by those giant eagles that I mentioned earlier. And this is one of them taken. This photo was taken in the Zuniak Reserve. This is the adult, and we have nests in that reserve. This is the baby. We have sloths there. We have weird things like this legless amphibian called a Sicilian trying to eat a giant earthworm that's 1 meter long. We have a frog that's on the brink of extinction, Atalopus palmatus. This is the last place where they live, just outside of our reserve, unfortunately. A new species of frog, The eye of a beautiful katydid. This is the katydid's face and the wings. It's just incredible, beautiful, beautiful thing. Lots of orchids, giant magnolia trees, new to science. This is one of the new species, and this is another of the new species. The tallest things in the forest, and they weren't known to anybody. Here's a spectacled bear that has come in to share dinner with my student who was studying the magnolias. Here's some magnolia buds, and she was eating dinner, and the bear came right up to her as a dinner guest. Fantastic, beautiful trees, some of the prettiest trees in the world. Again, new to science. This was a discovery that we made in 2001. This same genus, other new species, which we discovered a couple of years ago. Another new species in the same genus we discovered a couple of years ago. Beautiful, beautiful things. Tons of new orchids. I have to go fast through them, but all of these are new and endemic. Amazing details, beautiful structures. It's fun to just sort through these mossy branches with your hands and look at all these details. All of these are new species that we discovered and are in the process of publishing. This was previously discovered, but endemic to that mountain, a Dracula orchid. And here's another species of Dracula orchid that we just discovered. Just fantastic variety of things. I won't talk about any more because there's no time. And it's time for me to stop, but I'll just whirlwind tour. We'll just plow through very quickly one other reserve, which is just to the east in the Amazon basin, the Rio Ansu Reserve, which I won't even talk about. I'm just going to show you the beautiful plants and animals of the forest. And I'm going to stop there and thank all of our sponsors, especially Naturetrek, for helping us build this reserve system. And I think that Carrie or Sarah will relay your questions to me if you have some questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lou. That was absolutely fantastic. Rejoin, there we go. That was staggering, just absolutely astonishing looking through all of those photographs. I was sitting with my jaw dropped here. I must say, out of all of that, in addition to all of that, the view from your kitchen window is probably the most enviable of anyone's. I remember, absolutely incredible. Puts my small garden and bird feeders looking at the garage to shame. I've never seen a view quite like that outside of a kitchen window. My goodness. Folks, I'm sure you must have some questions for Lou to that. Please do start firing them to us. Of course, do continue to ask questions about your travel plans and any travel or COVID related questions that you may still have that we didn't get to answer prior to going over to Kerry's talk. Please do start asking.
Interesting that often towards the end of one of these evenings, you start to see the attendance figures go down, but we've kept every single person on, Lou, just because your talk was just spellbinding. I mean, I'm not a botanist, although I know Ecuador well, and your work there is just fascinating. What a playground you live in. And I think what comes across strongly in your talk there is your knowledge and passion. And I have to say that all of us staff at Naturetrek, from the founders, David and Marianne, downwards, we're all incredibly proud to work with you. What doesn't come across in your talk, I don't think, is some of the issues that you have working for an NGO in a country like Ecuador. Having lived and worked there myself, I know a bit about how bureaucracy works in the Andes, and it's extremely slow and frustrating. So to dedicate half of your life or more towards setting up a patchwork of reserves like this, I mean, that's just an enormous amount of work and dedication, and something you can be incredibly proud of. You're really leaving a legacy there. And yeah, we're extremely proud to work with you.
I should add, though, you're right. It's been very difficult, but I have a great team. I have a wonderful team of people who now they're the ones who deal with the bureaucracy. They're the brave ones who sit in offices for hours or days at a time, waiting for an answer, trying to push get some piece of paper or some signature on something. So hats off to my team, which makes this really possible.
Great.
We've had a couple of nice comments already, Lou, coming in. Helen Evans, amazing number of new species and what a special place. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And Hillary Green says, wonderful pictures, wonderful work being done there. Well done.
Thanks. And that's only a half of it. I could have talked for another couple of hours.
I think we all could have listened for another couple of hours.
Should we carry on?
Yeah. It was wonderful.
Just in terms of ecotourism there, Lou, I'm glad that you mentioned the rustic cabin that adventurous people can hike into. A couple of Naturetrek staff members have been there, and one of our new tours will visit that reserve. We've got a new Reptiles and Amphibians tour. There's some echoing going on. Is that me, folks, or is that someone else?
I think this might be Lou's connection, actually, because we don't get the feedback when he's talking. And it stopped now. He's put himself on mute.
Okay.
So
Lou's muted himself. So if we have a question for him, we'll turn his mic back on.
Yeah.
But yes, a couple of Naturetrek staff have been to the small cabin Lou was talking about, and we have a new tour. For any of you herpetologists out there, we have a new Reptiles and Amphibians tour to Ecuador going next year. I know my colleague Dan Lay, who has put that tour together, he's watching tonight. Dan is our in-house herpetologist, and he's very passionate about the world of amphibians and reptiles. So if you're intrepid and want to go and see some of those frogs and snakes, then join Dan next year. He'll send you some details.
Thanks, Andy. We've had a question here coming from Dennis Lambert asking, has Naturetrek considered asking for personal donations to help their conservation efforts around the world? Well, we don't proactively ask for personal donations, but I must say some people are just extremely generous and have opted themselves to make donations, perhaps when if a tour has been cancelled last year, and instead of a refund have offered for part of this to go towards the Naturetrek Reserve. Kerry or Andy, would you like to add to any of that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we put a little article in one of our newsletters last summer about the reserve and an update on our latest acquisition and whatnot there. And I was really surprised. It was very heartwarming that I had a real flurry of phone calls after that from people just who thought it was fantastic, so that they had not spent their travel budget for 2020, and could they send a bit of money towards the reserve instead? So that was a really nice thing, and we were very happy to accept those, of course, and send them over to help with our land acquisitions. Beyond that, we don't generally just ask for sort of generic donations for general conservation projects. We like to support very specific things or moments of crisis. So, for example, I'm sure you remember the awful earthquake in Nepal, and that was something that felt very close to home for Naturetrek. It's a place that our founders, David and Marianne, love, and it was key to starting up Naturetrek. So we did specifically fundraise through the Disasters Emergency Committee for Nepal, and I think we raised something like £30,000 during that moment. So we do things like that from time to time. Yeah, I hope that. And hi Dennis, not seen you for a while. Hope you're okay.
Lou, I have a question for you. This is from Craig Chipperfield, who says, I always thought that Ecuador was more forward thinking regarding the preservation of the natural environment. Is deforestation as big a problem there as in Borneo or Cambodia or other countries?
Craig, I think you're right. Ecuador is more forward-thinking. There's a sense among the average person that nature has value, maybe because of the amount of international tourism that's come through here. I've seen the horrors of Borneo on the news. I don't know it personally, but the vast areas of destruction. Those kinds of projects would raise a firestorm here in Ecuador. People would fight it. So yeah, I think Ecuador is an easier country to do conservation in than Borneo and Cambodia. But that said, Ecuador has the highest population density of any country in South America and the highest deforestation rate. So compared to the worst places in the world, we're better off. But we're still in really bad shape. And and a lot needs to be done rapidly to save the remaining forest before it's too late. But I would say also that Borneo is a very high priority for conservation.
Thanks, Lou. Another question coming in from Roger Bennett asking, could this project be put forward for the Earthshot Challenge? Lou, I'm wondering if you know what the Earthshot Challenge is, or Kerry, Andy, do you know it? It's not something I'm aware of.
No, we'll get our thinking hats on after this, Roger, and find out what the Earthshot Challenge is and whether it's appropriate. Sounds interesting. We'll get on Google and have a look.
Yeah, we'll have a look at that. Okay, we have no more questions for Lou at the moment, although I'm sure we might have a few more come in. Meanwhile, while Lou was talking, we had another question come in, Andy, which is someone asking, what happens if a destination changes to red while I'm away on holiday at that destination?
Well, as I said earlier, I think the risk of that is much lower than it was earlier this year. And if a destination does turn red, I think the government will give people some warning to get home before quarantine kicks in. So the pledge we've made is, if you're worried about a destination turning red while you're overseas with us, we will pledge to get you home at our cost before quarantine kicks in, therefore removing the worry, and then we'd refund you on a pro rata basis for your missed holiday. So I hope that reassures anybody worried about a country turning red at late notice or while you're on holiday.
Thanks, Andy. And just a further comment from Roger Bennett. The Earthshot Challenge is from Prince William and David Attenborough, £1 million initiative. That definitely sounds interesting. We'll be looking into that. I know Prince William's fairly proactive with his conservation work. So that sounds very interesting. Thank you. And at the moment, we don't have any more questions. So maybe we've answered everything. We did have quite an interactive session before Kerry started speaking.
I'll just fire another question at Lou, just on deforestation. Lou, you know that I know northwestern Ecuador very well from the bird watching side of things, and I've seen huge destruction on the western flanks of the Andes, particularly lower down for the palm oil industry. And there's a parallel there, isn't there, with Indonesia and Borneo. Have we seen a plateau now of deforestation for clearance for the palm oil industry, or is that an ongoing problem?
You're right. That's a good point. The western lowlands of Ecuador really are kind of like Borneo. They're almost completely destroyed. That happened before there was any kind of ecological consciousness in Ecuador. That was something that started in the 50s. And it is still a problem. There's some plantations spreading to the Amazon side, and that does represent a significant danger. And I should add that Ecominga has 2 reserves in the west as well. Besides our Baños reserves, there are hotspots of endemism on the western slope of the Andes, which aren't protected in any national parks. There's a scarcity of protected ecosystems there. So we have 2 quite large reserves, one called the Dracula Reserve to protect orchids of the genus Dracula, but it also protects a wide range of other species of plants and animals. And the other called the Manduriaku Reserve, which protects similar set of endangered plants and animals, many new species of frogs in both of those reserves, many new species of orchids coming out of them. They're both extremely important, and they will certainly soon be islands isolated from similar habitat.
Yes, yeah. Great. Well, it doesn't look like we've got any other questions, so we'll tie this up, Sarah. Instead of keeping people sat watching us, it's been great to be back. You know, it's been a bit of nostalgia back to last winter. Although we're not in lockdown anymore, it's great to see you all join us this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it, learning a bit about us. I've certainly enjoyed Lou's talk and the evening in general. So I hope all of you sign up tonight, join us for our other talks coming up this winter. I think the next one's next week, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, it's next Tuesday, 12th of October. We'll be focusing on Western Europe, featuring the Dolomites, the French Pyrenees, the Vercors and Corsica. So yeah, we hope you can join us. You can sign up on the homepage on our website. You'll also receive a follow-up email from this evening, this time tomorrow, which will contain a link to register. So we hope to see you there. If you think of any more questions after this evening, please don't hesitate just to give us a ring in the office or drop us an email, and we'll be more than happy to chat to you. So I think if we're wrapping up, yeah, well, it's a goodbye from me.
Thank you for me. Goodbye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Night, everyone. And thank you all so much for your kind comments. And thank you, Lou, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Night, everyone.
Bye.